The focus of this presentation is the 5 themes of geography and how to turn them into geographic questions. This is the most fundamental and important thing that we will learn in this class. You will need it for everything else that you do, so make sure you're taking extensive notes and writing down examples when you're asked to do so. The first theme that we're going to talk about today is location. Location is the simplest one to remember because location is just where is the place. Okay, so if we're talking about a place, it's just where is it on the earth. And there are two different types of location, absolute and relative location. And it's pretty easy to tell the difference between the two. The absolute location is just the exact place on the earth where that whatever you're looking for is. Okay, so the only way that we ever express absolute location, the only way we can show it is through latitude and longitude. So if I were to ask what is the absolute location of Higher Ground Academy, the answer would be 45 degrees north and 93 degrees west. It wouldn't be St. Paul, it wouldn't be Marshall Avenue, nothing like that. It has to be 45 degrees north and 93 degrees west. Now, relative location is any other way of describing where a place is. And so a couple of different ideas that we could use for relative location if we're looking at Minnesota. Where is Minnesota? It's a way of describing that, saying, well, it's on the top middle of the United States, or it's just north of Iowa, or it's just south of Canada. These are all ways of describing where Minnesota is without giving latitude and longitude, which means it is relative location. If we want to make it a little smaller so that we can understand it even on a smaller scale, if we talk about Higher Ground Academy, I might say, and this is what I often say when people ask me where it is, I might say it's about halfway between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. But maybe if I wanted to be even more specific, if people knew the area a little better, another way of saying the relative location would be to say it's 1 block away from the Holiday on Marshall and Hamlin. So any way of describing where something is that doesn't include latitude and longitude is relative location. If you're trying to give the absolute location, it has to have latitude and longitude. Place is the name of the second theme of geography, and it's also the trickiest theme of geography. A lot of times when I ask you about the place, you're going to give me the location. Location and place are very different things, and you have to keep them straight in order to be successful on quizzes and tests. Place is, as it says here, a mixture of human and non-human features in the location. Okay, so the human features, you can talk about the people, you can talk about what the people are like, you can talk about their race, how they act, what they do, their religion, anything like that would be the human features. And the non-human features are things like weather, things like if you stood there and looked out, what does it look like? What is the landscape? Are there hills? Are there mountains? Are there many trees? Any way that you would use to describe the area that you're in would be place. Okay, so place is a description. Location was where it is, but place is describing where or what it looks like, what it is like there. And so Fargo, North Dakota, if I were to try and give you a place description of Fargo, North Dakota, I would say things like are written here. It's flat. There's not very many hills there, so you won't see much of that. There aren't very many trees. It's a downtown area, and there just aren't. It's kind of a plains area, so you don't see very many trees. It has a small downtown compared to Minneapolis, just a few blocks by a few blocks. There's about 100,000 people, maybe a little more. It's a college town because it has 3 colleges really, really close by. And it is a city that's growing very rapidly. So all of these things fit into place. And if I could keep going forever on things about place, place fits so many different things. Just don't get it mixed up with location. The third theme of geography is region. And a region is simply a group of places that has something in common. The examples I have here are the MSP metro area in the Midwest, and I have maps for both of those. The MSP metro area is this top map right here, and you can see it doesn't just include our Minneapolis and St. Paul the way that we would think about it. And why? Because it has something in common. It has in common that everyone in that area, in the big blue area, which includes parts of Wisconsin all the way out to St. Cloud, okay, in this huge area, uses the MSP International Airport as their main airport. And so that's why we call it the MSP Metropolitan Area, okay? And so that's the thing that all of these people have in common that make them a region. Now, if we get rid of that and we look at the Midwest, you can see that your book and a lot of internet sources and things like that will say that this is the Midwest. Now, different people can have different definitions of the Midwest, but this is probably the most common one, and a lot of it has to do with farming. So the Midwest is seen as more of a farming region, whereas the West still has a lot of agriculture, but it's more ranching and raising cows and pigs and things like that. Okay, so the Midwest is a region, and what does it have in common? The way that it makes money. Okay, now the question becomes, if you are making a region and you're coming up with a region, where does it end? And a really good example of this is a region called Tornado Alley. If you look at the map on the bottom, this is a special purpose map that shows you the frequency of tornadoes from 1950 to 2004. And so if you look at the red and white is the really, really high frequency. There's a lot of tornadoes in that area. So, and then you go out to the yellow, and the yellow is a little bit lower. It's kind of medium frequency. It happens, more often than not, but not all the time. And then the blue is the really, really low frequency. You don't see very many tornadoes happening in those areas. They're very few and far between. Well, we have to decide then, as map makers and as people that are creating regions, what do we call Tornado Alley? What do we call this really high frequency region? And what you do is you have to decide, does it only count this little red area where there's a ton of them? Does it count the yellow area too, where there's a good amount of them? Or does it, since it's such a serious thing, should we count absolutely everything that has any blue on it? Because if you think you're safe from it and you don't pay attention, then it could kill you. It could really harm you. Well, experts have agreed that they should go with kind of the yellow region, and that's the region that we call Tornado Alley. But there could be an argument for any one of them. So a region really depends on the person creating that region. Take some time to do the write it out questions number 1, 2, and 3, in which you give your own example that you haven't heard before of a relative location, of a place, and of a region. A movement is another very simple theme of geography. It's just how people, goods, and ideas move from one place to another. And so I have just a couple of examples here for each one of those categories. So how people move, they move by using trains, planes, automobiles, trucks, buses, anything like that. Very, very simple. How do we get from one place to another? It could even be bicycles or walking or whatever, riding horses. It could be anything like that. It could be an example of how people move from one location to another. Now, the second part here, if we already did people, now the second part is goods. How do goods move around? Now, they do move by semi-truck, they do move by airplane and all that kind of stuff, but most of the items in the world that could move from one place to another, it happens on cargo ships. And cargo ships are these huge ships that have these big containers that are filled with goods that move from one place to another. That's why when you move something from one place to another, when you pay for something to get sent to your house, it's called shipping, right? Because most of them actually come on ships. Now, the last one is the trickiest one, but it kind of opens up movement to having a lot of different questions you can ask about it, and it's really kind of a good one a good theme to bring up when you're trying to come up with questions, and that is the ideas moving as well. So how do we move ideas? We talk to each other. How do we talk to each other around the world? We can use the internet, we can use telephones, telegraphs, any of that technology. So I put telecom systems as the example down there. So it's any way of moving your idea, your recipe, your opinion, whatever it may be, from one place to another. The fifth theme is human environment interaction, and it's just what it says. If you just look at the words, it makes sense. It's how do people affect their environment, and how does the environment affect those people? Okay, and some examples of how we affect our environment are irrigation. If the land is too dry for us to grow crops, then we use these big sprinkler systems like this. Okay, they're called center pivots or irrigators or things like that, and we put water onto the ground so that it can sustain our crops. Okay, well, this can be a really good thing because it can grow our crops, but it can also hurt nature because it can cause runoff. It can cause water to run off and take any pesticides or herbicides or any of the poisons that we use to get rid of pests and move them into our lakes and rivers. So there's good things and bad things about irrigation. Locks and dams is another one. If we look at this dam right here, you can see it stops the river, which gives us electricity and allows our boats to move up and down over what would normally be waterfalls. But what the problems that it has with nature, the effect that it can have is it can completely change what a river looks like. It can completely change the path of a river, which can cause flooding upstream, and it can cause death of wildlife too that can't make their normal trek from one area to another. Air conditioning is another one. If a place is too hot to sustain human life, that humans are not comfortable or don't want to live there, then we now have made this invention called air conditioning that allows us to live there. So we're interacting with our environment and making it a livable place. So now people can live in Arizona, can live in Las Vegas year round without any issues. The last one is all bad because it is deforestation. Deforestation is just cutting down way too many trees. Okay, these are all ways that humans interact with their environment, and it affects both the humans and the environment. Just knowing the 5 themes of geography is very important, but in order to truly be able to be a geographic actor, to be out there and actually taking action, you need to be able to ask all the right questions in order to understand the geography of a location. So in the back of your mind, you always have to remember the 2 big questions. Where is it located and why is it there? We talked about that in the last slideshow. But where is it located and why is it there should always be in the back of your mind. But we need to be able to ask questions about each of the 5 themes of geography. Okay, and so what I've done is I've put together 5 questions. Each one fits with one of the themes of geography, and I want you to try and kind of guess. If you have to write it down, if you can try and think it in your head, whatever you want to do, I want you to pause the video right now and try and guess which one is place, which one is location, which one is human environment interaction, which one is region, which one is movement. Okay, so now that you've paused it and figured it out for yourself, I can give you the answer. So where is higher ground in relation to Seafoam Stadium? That is a location question about relative location. The second one, how do people survive in the deserts of Israel? That question is asking about human environment interaction. It's not an easy place to live. How do we make it a better place to live? The third one is, what are people in Nebraska like? Well, you're asking about the human features, so you're asking about the place. What is it like there? Okay. What is the best way to ship my air hockey table that I sold on eBay to Idaho? Well, that's shipping. That's movement. You're moving that air hockey table, so that fits on the movement theme of geography. Is Egypt a part of the Middle East? The Middle East is a region, so you're asking about the region of that country. Read this quote from a history textbook and write down 5 questions, geographic questions about it, 1 for each theme of geography. Remember, you do not need to know the answers, you're simply asking the question here. read this news story and do the same thing you did on the last slide. For this news story, come up with 5 different geographic questions, 1 for each theme of geography. And you do not need to know the answer.